Angular only provides basic validators, such as required max length and pattern. Though we can do a lot with pattern, there are times we need custom validation rules. We define a custom validation rule with a custom validator. In its simplest form, a validator is a function. The validator function always takes one parameter, the form control or form group being validated. To allow passing in either a form control or a form group, we type the parameter using the abstract class, abstract control. This part of the syntax defines the type of value returned from this function. It looks a bit gnarly, so let's break it down. The validator function returns an object defining the broken rule, or null if it is valid. The returned object is comprised of a key and value pair, where the key is a string and the value is a Boolean. In the custom validator function, we perform whatever logic we desire. If our logic determines that the validation rule passes, we return a null. If the validation rule fails, we return an object. The key is a string and defines the name of the broken validation rule. The value is set to true to indicate that the current entry has an error. The broken validation rule is then added to the passed-in form control or form group error collection. Let's build a custom validator. Someone in marketing had this great idea to add a Rate Your Experience element to the form. At some future point, this will have a fancy user interface, such as selecting stars. But for now, they want a simple text box where the user can enter 1 through 5. I've already added the requested rating input element here and set the form control name directive to rating. Let's add the form control for the rating to the form model. We'll use an empty string for the default value. We could add a pattern validator here to check a range of values, but to try out custom validation, let's create our own numeric range validator. We can add our validator function above our component class. If this validator will only be used by this component, it makes sense to add it here. But if the validator could be used by other parts of the application, consider instead putting it in its own file. It can then more easily be reused by any component that needs it with a simple import statement. We'll see how to make a validator reusable later in this course. Let's call our validator function rating range. I'll paste the code and we can walk through it. As discussed on the slides, a validator function always takes one parameter, the form control or form group being validated. To allow either a form control or form group, we specify abstract control here, and we need to import it from Angular Forms. Next, we define the return type of this function. A validator function always returns a key and value pair, defining the broken validation rule, or a null if it is valid. We define our custom validation logic in the body of the validator function. For this specific example, we check if the control has a value that is not defined, is not a number, is less than 1 or greater than 5. If so, we return the key and value pair specifying the name of the validation rule. We'll call it range, and true to indicate that the validation rule was broken. The validation rule name is then added to the errors collection for the passed-in form control. If the control is valid, we return null. To set our new validator, we simply add it to the form control, just like the built-in validators. We change the rating form control from a single value to an array and pass the name of the validator function, rating range in our example, as the second parameter. Notice that we set the validation rule name here as range. In the HTML, if we want to display an error message for this particular validator, we use the validation rule name. I've already done that here. Now let's see how it works in the browser. Here's our new rating field. Let's put in a 7, and we see our validation message. Change it to 4, and all is well. Adding custom validation is as easy as writing a function. The only odd part is ensuring the appropriate return value. Null if the form control is valid, a key and value pair if it is invalid, where the key is the name of the validation rule and the value is true to add it to the list of validation errors. But notice that we hard-coded in the range here. What if we wanted to make this more generalized to work with a provided range of numbers?